Engagement and Strategic Communications for Schools. Hi, I'm Karen McKelvey, PSI's Director of Professional Development and Prevention Intervention Services. PSI partners with hundreds of schools supplying services in the areas of psychology, special education, school health, prevention, crisis services, ESL, and professional development. All of us here at PSI understand the need for resources such as this webinar to assist our partner schools in the burgeoning and ever-challenging areas of utilizing the media and managing school communications and social media. PSI is particularly grateful for its partnership with OAPCS and the opportunity to share the expertise of its leadership team. Our presenters today are Darlene Chambers and Julie Conry. Dr. Darlene Chambers is the President and CEO of the Ohio Alliance for Public Charter Schools, or OAPCS. With over 40 years of education experience at the elementary, secondary, and university levels as a teacher and in leadership, Dr. Chambers applies her knowledge of quality best practices to every aspect of OAPCS's work. She is also in her third year as a board member of the Cleveland, Ohio Transformation Alliance with the Cleveland Municipal School District. Joining her today is Julie Conry, and prior to joining OAPCS as Director of Communications and Grants, Julie held several leadership posts in advancement at The Ohio State University and in advocacy roles for several nonprofit health and education organizations. She is a veteran of 3 major capital campaigns at OSU and served as Director of Foundation Relations. In her role at OAPCS, she manages internal and external communication initiatives, media relations, publications, and resource development. During this presentation, the audience will be electronically muted. If you should have questions, use the chat function to the right of your screen to submit them. It operates much like an instant message system. As many as possible of these questions will be answered in the time allotted. Those that are not answered can be submitted to the presenters, whose email addresses are included on the slides. We are recording this presentation for those who couldn't register or attend. It will be posted on the PSI website within the week. And now, on behalf of all of us at PSI, I am very pleased to present Dr. Darlene Chambers and Julie Conry.
Good afternoon. This is Julie, and I'll introduce Darlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. We never take for granted that everybody knows all the education acronyms that our business throws out there on the street so much. So let me define what OAPCS is, just in case. It's the Ohio Alliance for Public Charter Schools. I've been in the CEO position for about 16 months in the president position, and I was affiliated with the organization since 2010. I served on the advisory board. We were very blessed and lucky about spring this year to have Julie join us in a brand new position at OAPCS, Director of Communications and Grants. This is the type of service we like providing to our public education partners. We believe that we can be educators as well as service providers. So not only do we use communications on behalf of the charter movement to help tell the truth and everything that's going right for our students and parents in quality education choice, we also try to share out as much as we can our techniques and our approaches in hope that you in your own environment can be your own best communications directors and guides. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to the director that I'm very proud of. She's led us through some critical, crucial initiatives and been able to get solid advocacy and important, correct information out there in media. She's already blushing, by the way. She's sitting right beside me. So Julie, if you will, let's launch into the information.
Okay, I am sorry. Julie and Darlene, I need to interrupt. Your slides don't seem to be operating. So we're going to take,
now?
No. We're going to take over the slides, and if you would just tell us when you want us to advance. So give us about 10 seconds here, and we'll get it pulled up. So you're ready to go.
So for our guests listening in to the webinar today, this is exactly what happens when you have a media meeting. It never totally turns out exactly like you'd think, but we're perfectly fine. We're going to have PSI advanced, and Julie, let's get started.
All right, can we move to the overview slide, please?
Go to the next one. Okay.
Thank you. What we want to do today with our goals is really talk to you about media protocols, pulling together a toolkit for your organization. How do you promote success for your wonderful students and families? How you manage those inevitable crises that might come your way, and some general guidance in dealing with media inquiries, which is part of the work that we do. And we will also touch on social media. This is more designed as a flyover versus a deep dive. We could probably do, I think, very focused webinars on a lot of these single topics. So we will be moving through the material quickly. Certainly we hope we can engage folks along the way, and we do welcome any questions. If we can't handle them today, to email them to me as well, and that information will be up at the end of the webinar. And next slide. Can you advance? So here we are talking about an internal toolkit, and I think it's really important for an organization from the beginning to define for yourself what your goals and objectives are and what your capacity is. And part of this is doing an internal audit of your capacity. And by that, I mean what budget and resources do you have to devote to media, to the staffing that's required, and how can you work within the possible constraints that you might have. We do have at OAPCS a written guideline for our media plan. It does define our internal processes and staff roles, and I do recommend that an organization move in that direction. You need to also define your key community media contacts and keep that updated. Whether you're in a small community or a metropolitan area, it's very important to know who the reporters are and who the key media players are in your specific community. And those lists can change, so you need to keep them updated both with emails and phone numbers. And also in large cities, most reporters are going to have a Facebook and a Twitter account, and you can follow them and communicate with them through those as well. You can set up a regional monitoring system to look at the media coverage in your area through the Google Alert system. That is no charge to you. You can pull in your certain parameters. We follow charter school news from throughout the state of Ohio, as we are a statewide alliance. So every day in my inbox, I'm seeing everything written within the state that has to do with a charter school keyword and topic. And then you need to define some of your own guidelines, both proactive and reactive, and look at the talent that you have within your staff. If you have a great photographer, if you have other folks who can work with social media, you may not need to go outside to purchase those services. Next slide. I think with the media protocols and guides, there are several key items here. One is to define who is the key spokesperson for your organization. It's best if you have a single individual in that role. You need to set out some response steps that will be typical for what your organizational capacity is, how to coordinate that among your staff. You should have some social media regulations in writing about how that works for your group, whether you have an administrator, or you let anyone post anything without previewing it or having some guidelines in those ways. And who is your internal respondent? In most cases, that would be your communications director, or in our case, I play that role. In Darlene is typically the key spokesperson for the organization, and she can speak to that a little bit.
I have a background in human resources as well. That's why I'm bringing up this particular point. The communications policy is every bit as important as any other policy in the employee handbook. You put your employees in harm's way if you have an assumption that they understand who can respond on behalf of the organization. So OAPCS and other organizations I have led or consulted with in the past, we put together a communications policy that's approved by our board, and we have it in the employee handbook. It's part of the employee orientation program. They sign the handbook that they understand all policies. And once a year, Julie and I go through the expectations about the communication plan. Typically, your CEO, your president, your executive director, your director will be the designated spokesperson. It's just the obvious person that leads the organization that addresses the press. But we all know how much we're busy, or we travel, or we're pulled in many directions. I highly recommend that you have a second designated spokesperson, and for us, that's Julie. She queues it up, she can speak to the press, and if it really gets drilled down, she will explain that Dr. Chambers will be availed at a later date and will provide more information. We have specialized directors that under great guidance, such as Trent Hatt, our government affairs director, feels very comfortable, I feel very comfortable that he speaks with press or media in a very guided sense. But let me be abundantly clear. You need a policy. I recommend it be in your employee handbook, and I recommend that your leader be the primary spokesperson.
Thank you. To move back into internal media plans and prompts to really position the organization for success, we're going to first talk about how you manage that from a strategic and tactical standpoint. And part of that is to develop ideas that are timely and newsworthy within the purview of how the world defines news, which may be different from how you define news within the organization. It's helpful to map a media and school calendar so that you can look at potential points through the year where things happen within your organization that have potential to be shared with the public and with your outside community. And I think you need to set some goals and targets. Make them modest at first if you don't have a lot of experience for this, but it gives you some guidelines to shoot for. And obviously enlist the support of your parents and teachers in this effort, because they are very close to, in many cases, wonderful stories that can be developed for your local media. And track your reporting dates and share your results. Over time, you can really improve your performance if you learn what works in the community in which you're located. Next slide.
The only thing that I would add to Julie's good advice and points is I must impress upon all of us, you have to be ahead of the curve. When you're surprised, when you don't have anything prepared, is the world's worst time for your organization and you as a spokesperson, because you will be caught flat-footed. Constantly, my team scans and appreciates what might be asked of us on behalf of our membership as an advocacy organization. Please be informed that there's a new style of pushing out national reports, research reports. The new style in the last 6 months to a year has been to have media briefings, embargoed reports, go straight to opposition or media. I suppose we could complain about that, or we could be proactive, like OAPCS tries to be, And we know when something may come out, we do our own research, and we at least have something to say that's powerful and important to our community. Julie?
One of the other starting points for a plan is to inventory your school assets, because your school, your students, your parents, they're the starting point of developing human interest stories. So the parents, the community, who your funders are, your staff members, what programs you have, what metrics you have, what potential collaborations or grant funds you may be running, and the milestones of your students. Those are all really mining points that you can develop into story ideas that showcase success versus the theme of the continual deficit discussion that often goes on regarding charter schools. I think the responsibility to share the good news is on the part of the schools and the community itself. Most people don't have this intrinsic knowledge, and it's up to us to develop that and share those stories the best way that we can. Next slide. Developing an angle for the story is essential. Most reporters aren't going to write a feel-good story because it's Wednesday. They usually have assignments in which there's a specific point, objective, or agenda that they have to cover. In the same way, you have to frame your stories and speak their language in order to get the attention that you need to start that partnership. So it's really important to personalize what your students have accomplished, what your teachers may be doing that's interesting, what a particular family may have done. We're really humanizing the stories as well. A good human interest story has an emotional impact. It needs to have a compelling aspect to it. Students who are overcoming obstacles, students who are achieving against high odds, those are all compelling stories. And even celebrations of milestones that may not have been expected are very touching as well. I think a good example of this recently was Townsend Community School. It's a dropout recovery school in a rural area of Ohio. And they did a very nice graduation story, but the story was focused on two students and their personal profiles of how the difficulties that they had to overcome to achieve this made it a very compelling piece that was written by the Sandusky Register. So it wasn't just a macro story about today we're graduating 400 students. It was a story about meet this person and meet this person, and here's what happened behind the scenes to help them get to the point where they are today. And it's also a good thing to know what others know about you. So I also recommend Googling your school and Googling what other keywords may be affiliated with your organization to see what is out there that you may not even be aware of, good or bad. And sometimes you can find actually very compelling story ideas that way about someone who may have mentioned an affiliation that you didn't even know existed. So those are oftentimes part of the research process as well.
I just want to bring up something we accessed by accident when I first took over one of the largest sponsors, Ohio Council of Community Schools, in 2010. I was given the position and I thought, how do I move OCCS into the media arena? How do I get out the good stories? Maybe some of you on the webinar today remember a very powerful movie, Waiting for Superman. And it was starting to dribble out, the word was starting to come out that there was this movie that was really going to change up the conversation being launched. And I thought, well, Paramount Pictures isn't going to talk to this woman in Toledo, Ohio, but I thought, let me give it a shake. And my staff reached out to Paramount, and lo and behold, we premiered the first showing in Ohio of Waiting for Superman. The media was lined out the door. We got a lot of positive coverage for not only what's going right in the charter school community, but about our organization, being able to share out what an authorizer that's affiliated with the university does, what Ohio's landscape looks like. From that moment, we got a call not too much later, this time from 20th Century Fox, not us calling them, but them reaching out to us as well about, could you also premiere another movie with Viola Davis in it that some of you may remember called Won't Back Down. My point is, We made a reach out that no one thought we had a chance at. We staged the media in it. We showed a powerful message. We got an opportunity for a second movie. And out of both of those showings, I ended up with my own radio AM show, talk show, called Eye on Education. So think about your communication strategy. Try not to limit yourself. There's great opportunities out there, and we don't just have to be reactive. Julie?
Next slide. A little bit about pitching a winner, which means how do you have your story ideas get embraced by the media and put into print. We have a little photo here down in the corner. I'm going to call him Joe Editor. He's just waiting to hear from you. He's looking very anxious. But there are a couple of key factors that lead to success or failure with this. First, you need to know whether your story is newsworthy or unique. You have to know the audience that you're pitching to. For print media, it should be a beat reporter or the features editor of the paper. For radio, it's usually a producer or news editor. And for TV, it's an assignment editor or reporter. And these people will be identified on any particular website. Most large cities have an education beat reporter or a general assignment reporter as well. And when you're crafting your pitch, you need to just talk in the language like the news world, which is be brief, be concise, and be attention-grabbing. Write your own headline before you even write the text, because you need to be that concise to boil down the essential parts of what your story is about. Next slide. A couple of guidelines here too, which I'm going to call just the facts. If you're delivering this through an email, the subject line is critical. It needs to also be as compelling as an interesting headline. Keep your story idea limited to a couple of paragraphs. Don't put it in an attachment for this very reason that some reporters screen out emails that have attachments. And so you need to put the entire pitch into the body of the email. And if you haven't heard, respectfully follow up with another email or possibly a phone call to see if A, they might have not received it, and B, what their response might be. If you're going to contact a reporter by phone or an assignment editor, script it out in advance. You maybe have 30 seconds to make your case, and always leave contact information so they can get back to you, because often you may be speaking to voicemail before you reach an actual person, and that's fine as long as they have a way to follow up if they want to do something with your story idea. Next slide. Timing is also extremely important. Most reporters are working on deadlines, and they have specific time cycles during the day in which they will accept information. So if a reporter does call in, we always ask what the deadline is that they're working on, whether it's that day or 2 days or a weekend. It's very important to know that. Be persistent. Don't pester the editor or reporter, but you can certainly fairly make 1 or 2 requests back to see if you haven't heard. Send a follow-up note or email and ask to stay in touch even if they have not been positive about what you're pitching, and thank them for their interest and keep the door open for future partnerships. Next slide. Ultimately, you may have to do a news release about the activities at your school that you want to highlight. There are great templates in the internet for what a news release can look like. I've just provided here the essential, again, the essential pieces, which are the 5 W's. You want to have the most critical information in the first paragraph so they don't have to hunt for it. You can highlight certain aspects, whether it's an event, whether it's a speaker coming to your school, whether it's information about a student achievement. Be as concise as you can, and write it to the style in which the media is accustomed, which means always check grammar and spelling, and you want it to be as polished as possible when you send it out with your organization's name and logo on it. Next slide. Messaging is pretty critical in the charter school world. There have been a number of studies over time and a lot of surveys and focus groups about how to verbalize certain messages that are not seen as negative. And in this column on the left, you'll see it's the right of every child to receive an excellent education. In many major surveys, 4 to 1 Americans believe that this statement is absolutely accurate. In other ways to share charter school material, it's always good to talk about how they raise achievement. They are more responsive to student needs. They are a partnership. They offer options. They work for families. It's best not to do a negative slant saying it's an alternative because the other option has failed. It's more to focus on why charters have been successful in the particular setting that you are in. Using student testimonials is very powerful. Parent-to-parent communications are very powerful. If you're going to use images, generally K through 3 students resonate the most. Children and the innocence of children is extremely effective. Graduation images convey success. So you want to make sure that your images as well are capturing the messaging and the theme that you want to persuade the media to use.
I can't impress among all of you that do not go negative. When I began my teaching career, I was a physical education teacher and I played volleyball for Ball State University. Why am I bringing up volleyball? Because that's exactly what it feels like. Press might throw the ball over with a negative statement. The community throws a negative statement back. Can you see the ball going back and forth across the net? And who gets lost in that ball game? It are the students and the parents. The reason why we're in the charter school sector. So please stay positive. Please think that being called a cheerleader and positive perky is okay. I'm all right with those names being attached to me as long as the students and the parents that believe in quality school choice get to continue their choices. I've come up with some positive statements that I truly believe in and no one can shake so far, and it's telling the truth. And when I get pushed in a corner, when there's some data out there that it's hard to address, I try really hard to come back to these statements. Let me share them with you. Parents and students in Ohio continually demonstrate high participation in school choice. It's a flat-out fact. The passage of House Bill 2 represents significant progress in Ohio's response to replicate already existing best practices of quality community schools. We're already doing what House Bill 2 is trying to make a best practice across the entire spectrum. Let's be proud of that. We have a foundation to build on so that our charter school students and families can continue to access the quality options that have been offered throughout the state for nearly 2 decades, 20 years. Another one, any reliable measure of student performance must take into account the negative relationship between poverty and performance. And the gap is widening for all public schools, both traditional and charter. It's not that you need to memorize or write down what I just said, but I'm hopeful those little snippets, those little statements that at the core of me I believe in, and the facts that are behind them, help me bring that out in messages when, again, the data might be hard to address, but these are the facts. Julie?
And I think it's important also, there are great resources that you can model some practice statements upon. Every time OAPCS does a media statement, we post it on our website. We have it on a location called the Newsroom, which is under our Advocacy tab on our website. And we accompany those with the media stories that have used part or some of those statements. NAPCS is another good source. Their website is always going to have a collection of their media statements and press releases, as would many state alliances. So if you're looking for ideas and some language examples, those are wonderful resources to use, and they cost nothing. Next slide. I want to touch a little bit on images and photography, because in today's media, images are pervasive. We see them not only with social media, but within every potential use imaginable. And everyone has a cell phone and a camera now. So I'm suggesting you put those to work. If you don't have resources to hire a professional photographer at every opportunity, there are many instances where you can do great work all by yourself. The two samples here that we have were both taken with phone cameras. And on the right-hand side, it was a science fair for an elementary school. You notice the little boy is wearing the t-shirt of his school. He's standing in front of a very interesting science experiment about gummy bears. It's a very compelling, touching photo. He's smiling. He's looking quite happy to be there. It's a close-up picture, so he's in frame. It is in focus, and you don't have to look far to have an emotional reaction to that photo. On the left, again, it was a very interesting day we had for National Charter Schools Week here in Columbus. We did have a group of students come in to accept a legislative resolution, and that's Dr. Chambers with them and their two school leaders. And on the way into the building, we stopped to take a shot because, again, for some of these kids, they had never come into really the seat of Ohio government before. So it was a fun day for them, and it was a nice way for us to remember that day. And we've used these photos, both of them, in many, many instances. So again, don't limit yourself. If you need to learn some basic about photography and how to take a quick picture and have a good product, again, there are lots of YouTube videos for that, and make use of those resources. And if you can, invest in a camera for your organization and have someone become adept at using it, because images are going to help you in the long run. Next slide.
Notice Darlene was the happiest with all those kids. Please remember what business you're in, whether you're a service provider or whether you're an authorizer, board member, school leader, whatever your stature is in your organization. Remember the business, and in your photos, students and parents need to be there. And truly, that smile you saw on my face, that's the crowd I like hanging out with. Sorry, Julie, I had to say that.
Back to you. We're going to switch gears here now and talk a little about crisis communication, which is not always on the welcome mat when you want it to be. By its nature, crisis communication is an unplanned event. It is deployed in the case of controversy, emergency, or calamity that you often don't have very much control over or anticipate. And the plan really prepares you as an organization and your staff to respond effectively and appropriately. It defines tasks and responses to protect the privacy and gather the facts, and it directs internal and external information flow. Next slide.
I want to piggyback on what Julie just said. Again, I'm going to draw from my human resource background. Be very, very careful about the topics that you pick, that you understand the legality of what you cover, and that you spend time, if you have any, the best you can, to vet all the scenarios. I can't impress upon you enough how preparation is key, both in the social media world we travel in and certainly among any media interactions. The essential steps, Julie?
The essential steps really, again, reflect being prepared versus unprepared. And that means preparing your team, preparing your message, reviewing privacy and legal issues before you even begin communicating or responding to whatever the scenario is that you're faced with. And these are going to vary. They could be anything from a human relations issue. It could be something related to criminal charges. It could be a physical calamity, such as a fire in a building where safety issues are involved and people need to know what the situation is. And you're often going to be contacted prior to the ability of the organization to gather all the facts and know the true picture. That often doesn't reveal itself for a period of time. So you have to position yourself to be responsive, to look over the facts as best you can, to not basically not be prepared with a statement, and run through some scenarios in advance that could happen within your organization, and put those into your guide and have steps that would follow from that. Whether it's, again, a physical situation, whether it's those are fairly predictable, hopefully not going to be in your reality, but they have happened and they could happen.
It's okay to have some statements written down that are called go-to statements. One of the worst ones that you need to avoid is no comment. Just important that you feel comfortable about what you can say and being able to be truthful and honest if it is an arena that you're not allowed to discuss. If there's a court case going on, if there's an investigation by a state agency, if there's something in the human resource realm, you need to still have a statement about the situation that's general and acceptable so the public knows you're addressing it, but that you're mindful and protective of the individuals or the organizations that need to be protected.
Next slide. We put together some quick tips for do's and don'ts within these scenarios. So as Darlene mentioned, in most cases, if you can avoid saying no comment, that is ideal, because no comment is often construed in a negative sense. It's not good to wing it and to just kind of talk on the fly. It's not recommended to go off the record, which means you would talk to a reporter and expect that what you said would not be published. That's not necessarily a binding agreement that is necessarily going to prove to be true. Don't go off message. So once you have crafted what your organization's position is, you have to stay with that repeatedly, even if it's over a series of days. It's best, again, to assess the situation, gather your facts, determine the impact both for your students, your families, your staff, put together your message, be accurate, don't disclose information that could have legal ramifications, and assign that essential spokesperson for your organization. Next slide. And here are just a couple of examples when the information is not complete, but you still need to have something in hand to respond to. So here's a couple of examples we put together. We are moving quickly to verify facts. We will provide information as soon as we know more. Our goal is to gather all relevant facts and take appropriate steps. These seem generic, but for the most part, they can protect you, but yet show that you are not ignoring whatever media interest is in the story, and for your families as well. There is an obligation to show that you are on top of the issue and have the capacity to provide information when it is available.
As head spokesperson, I rely heavily on my staff to script messages with me. We are very cognizant of avoiding damage to the reputation and the community trust. We care about our membership, we care about the students, we care about quality school choice. I balance known facts. I have to recognize those known facts with disclosure levels and making sure that I have time to check those facts and see how I can be proactive on behalf of all of you. You have to be conservative versus declarative. Think about that. Conservative, this is the facts, these are our statements, here's what we're hopeful for, here's what we're doing, this is what we will do in the future, I'm proud to be, and fill in the blank. Conservative versus declarative, of making a statement that this is totally wrong study, I disagree with their methodology, and just declare it without any other conversation. I hope that makes sense to all of you. I do, as a leader, check with your type. I come out to community members, membership in the time that I have, because you're out there doing the work and I'm speaking potentially on your behalf. So as a leader, as an authorizer in the charter movement, and something was going on in a school, I would reach out to the school leader, to the management company, to the board member to get a total perspective and not make a declarative one from an office that I was sitting in.
I think it's also important to remember that omission is not always a signal that you haven't taken appropriate action. Oftentimes, in the absence of facts, people will fill up information with what they think happened. So it is important to keep working toward directing what you know in a sensitive and proactive way so that people don't fill in the blanks with wrong information. And we've seen that play out over and over with a number of very highly national profiled school calamities in the last 2 years. Next slide. Just real quickly, we want to touch on some of the processes to work with reporters when they're calling you and you're not really at the point where you're working to get the story into the media yourself. We screen all our calls here for the reporter's name and the media outlet. Again, we want to know what their deadline is, what the focus of the story is. If we can get specific questions in advance, all the better, and whether this is tied to other news coverage that may be happening locally or nationally. Next slide. It's often difficult to know whether you engage in writing or in person with a reporter. There's different aspects to doing either one of these. Written responses do provide you extra time for research. They reduce the tendency for misquotes. They control the message better. You can emphasize the facts you think are important, and they have multi-uses. A live interview, whether that be on the phone or the broadcaster, those are usually controlled by the reporter. They're not predictable. You can be subject in most cases to misquotes. They can be question traps, and they're going to be really directed at the story angle of the reporter, and you may not know up front what that angle is until it's too late and you've said something that you regret. Move on, next slide. In the case of a broadcast, more of a planned interview, say with a talk show host or a TV host, we found that there are certain items that are very helpful. Requesting questions in advance, they may not give them to you, but you always ask. You prepare a written script in advance for those questions. It's good to rehearse the interview and anticipate what the off-script questions might be that come up in relation to a specific theme.
I'm on the radio and TV now frequently, and I just want to share with you what I try to say to myself before I go into the studio. Darlene, don't over-explain. Try not to apologize. Expect to stay on the message, and don't carry in your entire briefcase. And my staff all line up at the door and say, please, with all your degrees, could you stay out of the weeds? And they say it lovingly. But truly, it's about feeling comfortable, calm. Even the radio shows now, such as NPR, WOSU, All Sides, which I've been on a few times, take cameras and they podcast it after, so you're on camera a lot. That was a great awakening for me. I don't know if I was too busy one day, but for some reason, when I went into the studio, I had no paper. I literally just had my car keys with me. And I walked into the studio and sat down, and they podcasted the show. The other folks on the show at the microphone had so many files, and they were shuffling through so many papers. I'm not sure that I was brilliant, but I certainly won that round of the debate because I looked calm, casual, and informed. So I just want to share some of those tidbits for you. Try to stay brief, try to stay on your message, and join Darlene's effort to stay out of all the weeds.
We're going to advance 2 slides to social media, if you would. So we promised we'd touch on social media, which obviously how can you have a communications or media program without acknowledging this? The most common platforms obviously are Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. As an organization, you can choose to have a presence in one or all of these, and they each have aspects of time, labor, and resources that are required to do them successfully. And my guidance on this is truly look at some of the examples of Facebook pages of organizations like yours or like OAPCS, see kind of the content and the style of what's posted, and get a sense of what you can do from your own organization that would be both blending with these kinds of styles and unique to the groups that you're serving. Next slide. Content drives traffic. We absolutely know that. Categories for schools to post about. News of your school, obviously, and your students. You can share news and media features that have your personnel featured in them. Articles and studies relevant to the school and education sector. And quotes, photos, milestones, achievements, but keep it at a professional level. You don't really want to duplicate what a personal Facebook stream would be like. Next slide. And again, within looking at content, there are 3 keys for posts that do reach audiences, and that's content, cuteness, and controversy. And by content, people do want to read in-depth pieces, and they do want to look at profiles and information that's useful to them. So we do that across a myriad of platforms, and we certainly have a deep set of resources to look for within the education sector for that. Next slide. Cross-platform content is to be able to really take advantage of the work that you're doing in a multitude of ways. And one example we're sharing here is we do a newsletter from OAPCS, which is now quarterly, and we do write original stories for that newsletter that feature some of our programs and staff. We did a very interesting interview with 2 teachers who were using the Illuminate system as part of our Straight A grant. We wrote a wonderful interview story with them. We also posted that into different parts of our social media, our Facebook, our Twitter account. We posted it on our website, and you see that there's a circular pattern here that you move people within your periodicals to your website, to your social media, so they're engaging with you on a number of levels. Next slide. Here's just a few tactics also to increase your reach and build followers. You can share content from other Facebook streams that you think are compelling. You can tag, which means you post whatever content you're sharing, and you tag those organizations that might be involved with that particular post. And again, multi-channel marketing, where you have an essential piece that you may have created and using that within other areas of your social media world in constant contact through emails, websites, events and seminars, and other aspects.
I want to be truthful. Social media websites are a huge investment, not only monetarily for a leader of an organization, personnel, also in upkeep. It's very, very important to have a plan and purpose, and you've got to stay engaged as a leader with the alignment of the goals and the mission vision of the entire organization. I'm not much of a tweeter, maybe a twit, but not a tweeter. I want to say something about tweeting. You may already know it, but if you tweet and the opposition retweets, and then you tweet and retweet and tweet, you're playing that same bad volleyball game. So be very careful, be very mindful about time to call it. If I had to say what in the social media world is the toughest to maintain, it's that beginning one. It's called that website where the bird and the Facebook sits on. I rarely see a website that's kept up to date. It usually takes 6 months to a year to reboot it, to get it to where you want to change it I've changed up 2 websites. I'm consulting with people nationally about designing the text behind their websites. It is tedious. It will cause great debate and discussion among your staff, but it is the front door to your building. It is that front hallway to who you are. It is worth that investment. For the millennials and the people tweeting out there, be very careful what you say in social media. It never, ever will go away from the cyber highway. And be mindful that when you're working on part of your organization, it's that organization's reputation that you're carrying along with your fingers while you tweet.
And I think to add to that, it's very important if you start a social media program that you do have dedicated staff, even if it's a small part of their job, so you don't create it and walk away from it. The true effectiveness of these programs is the immediacy and the constancy that you devote to them. So if you start a program and walk away, people are not going to continue to engage with you, and it's not going to be successful. You won't really meet the goals that you've set. Next slide. Just real quickly, a Twitter account is, we do have one for OAPCS. We do oftentimes create Facebook, Twitter posts simultaneously, so you can do that very efficiently. And Twitter is really going to move forward, and a lot of social media experts feel it's, in the end, it's really going to propel itself past Facebook ultimately because it's a much faster medium. Next slide. I invite you all today to connect with us and our social media, and we would love at the end of this webinar if you would go to our Facebook page and like us and follow us on Twitter and visit our newsroom. And these are the addresses where you can do that. I would love to come in tomorrow and see that I have really gained about 20 more Facebook followers from our webinar today.
Did you say 200?
No, I'd be happy with 20, but 200 would be fabulous. And again, you can, the best ideas are often shared ideas, so we would be happy to invite you to look at our posts and share information as readily as you would like. And we do have a very active social media presence, and you would not fail to spend some time to look at those samples.
It has been a total pleasure. We feel honored that you signed up for the program today. I can only hope that there was a morsel or two that made a difference for you. I'm about facts. I'm about truth. I'm about the kids. Julie and I will try to help in whatever way we can and share out whatever knowledge base that we have if it's helpful for our parents and students and for quality education choice today. I think we have some time for some questions, just a few minutes. Yes, Julie? Yes.
This is Karen McKelvey. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Some of them are quite excellent. The first one, we do not have a budget for a designated communications staff person. How do we manage any media relations program with the staff that we do have?
When I went to OCCS as executive director, we did not have a budget for a communications director back in 2010. Most authorizers didn't have that position. I was very fortunate. I called my team the Magnificent Seven, so if there's any OCCSers on the line, I'm still very proud of you. We used existing staff and directors, however large or small, to get out there and research all those resources that Julie had to say, to access organizations like OAPCS, and you better betcha, in that next round of budget, I had a line item that was a communications piece, and I sold it to the board of trustees who were overseeing our authorizer, and had no problem at all selling it. It was a little tough in that first year without a line item, without the staff, but I was very fortunate. I used who I had. I did a lot of research, and I understood how important it was. Julie, anything you'd add?
I think the other solution is within the purview of a budget, again, you can hire freelancers at a pretty reasonable rate given what your needs are in your community, and you can have them designated to produce a set of articles or press releases or work with you on what your needs are within a certain period of time and pay them for their services accordingly without having a full-time staff. But it's up to your organization to decide what those priorities are, and do try to look within your community for people who have a reputation for good work.
You might even try to go for a grant, whether it's parent engagement, informing quality choice, coming up with an idea and searching for a small grant to support it. At OAPCS, what Julie just told you is how I managed it, because when I walked into the organization, we were a little short on staff, and so I used the contracting because simply we didn't have the funds for full-time, and it did work. Next question, Karen.
Okay, this is a question that has come in from someone who is involved in a charter school, and the question is, the press is always so negative about charter schools. How can we make a difference in this?
I think the beginning point is to expect that, again, the responsibility in part for spreading successful stories is on the schools and those who choose to attend them. So you're not going to necessarily conquer negativity, but you can present the positive aspects and share that out in as many venues as you can. Social media particularly is a good source to do that because it's unfiltered. You don't have a gatekeeper on whether or not it's appropriate for a specific media outlet. You can share the stories in the ways that you want, and there can be a tremendous recipient group that can look at that and again share it in their networks as well.
Negativity, in my mind, I visualize it as a disease. It kind of looks like that Mucinex commercial, those ugly little germs that make you cough. That's what negativity looks like to me. And I try to tell myself I'm fighting it off. I'm not going to succumb to it. I'm going to try to be proactive. I understand I walk that same path as the person who asked that question. I'm going, is there something I don't know? Is there that much bad out there? And then I go, nope. There's a lot of good stories. I know there's much positive to share. But then you got to remember, I'm perky, positive, and a cheerleader. I don't know if I could be in this business if I was not. I believe in what I'm doing, and I try to share out that positive story about what I know.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that's very helpful to the person that asked that question. I think we have time for one more. The question is, my CEO does not think communications are a priority. How do I present this as an area that does require development in our organization?
I think initially part of that is involving a research task, which is to look at similar organizations and institutions that have a program that is successful, compile examples of those, potentially talk to the directors or staff folks behind those groups, and get samples of how a communications program has made a difference and showed success. And obviously create a template and a budget that you might also obtain from your peers in the organization. I think any CEO makes decisions that are reasonable and within the capacity of the organization. And I think the essential part of making a case is showing that a difference can be made and how you would deploy some of those strategies on behalf of your school.
I think you have to get very comfortable with proposals. I agree with Julie. You've got to make the business case, and you have to have patience. Communication cannot be avoided any longer, but I want to speak on behalf of that leader that may have given you that image that communication is not important. Perhaps that leader doesn't have a budget for it. Perhaps that leader has other priorities and could use your good wisdom to put that proposal together and sell the idea. I try to sell things in small increments. I try to show small wins. I try not to have a full-blown communications plan if there's none to begin with. I just take little steps, and it's always served me well these past 10 years in 3 separate organizations. That's always been my strategy. And I never did have a budget. I did not have a board that necessarily said, oh yes, let's have a full-blown communication team. And in every single organization, by the time I left it, they appreciated communications. Karen, thanks so much. Are we out of time?
Yes, I'm just going to wrap this up. We can't tell you enough how much we appreciate this vital information, Darlene and Julie. To all of you listeners, we trust you found this presentation useful, and we hope you'll participate in future PSI webinars. If you have any questions or would like additional information on any PSI service or on OAPCS, you can contact Karen McKelvey at PSI or Darlene Chambers or Julie Conry, as you see that email address there on your screen. When the webinar ends, you will receive a short evaluation that you should complete and then submit in order to receive a certificate of attendance. This will come to you electronically within about a week to 10 days. Thank you very much to everybody.